I know a place where you can find the most exciting stories ever told and the most fascinating lessons ever taught. They're all right inside the Bible, waiting to be found. All you have to do to join the team is open it up, and you'll find all sorts of great Bible discoveries. Have you ever had to make a promise? More importantly, have you ever had to keep a promise? Those are two very different things. It's easy to make a promise. It's as easy as saying the words, "I promise." In fact, I could say to you right now, Discovery Team, I promise that we will discover $100 today. That's a pretty easy promise to make, but it's probably not a very easy promise to keep. In order to keep a promise, what I say is going to happen really does have to happen. And a promise is only good if you can keep it. Promises come in all different sizes. Sometimes they're called contracts or agreements or deals, or sometimes they're called covenants. But they all mean the same thing. A promise means that something is going to happen. Do you think God makes promises? Do you think God keeps promises? Well, that's exactly what we're trying to discover today. We're setting out to find some covenants or promises that God has made. And hopefully we'll discover what happens when God makes a promise. So keep your eyes and ears open and we'll be on our way, because there's plenty to learn. I promise.
Thousands and thousands of years ago, not long after the Great Flood, and in a time when God remained a silent mystery to the people of the earth, there lived a humble sheep herder named Terah. When Terah was quite old, he traveled from the land of Ur of the Chaldeans to a new home in the fertile valley of Haran. There he lived with his family and flocks. Haran was a green paradise, and in that place Terah's family grew large. He shared the land and the flocks with his family, his sons, and his sons' sons. Terah, being as old as he was, relied heavily on his sons to maintain the herds and the land. At times when Terah was too sick or weak to work, he left it completely up to his children to manage the family's wealth. Terah's oldest son was named Abram. Abram was a wise and honest man who took the responsibility as head of his father's household very seriously. Nothing was more important to Abram than caring for his family's business. But one day, that all changed. For on that one day, while Abram was out tending the flocks, the Lord visited him in the fields. "Leave your country," the Lord said to Abram. "Leave your father's household and go to a new land which I shall show you. I have a promise to make to you, a promise to turn you into the father of a great nation of people. I promise to bless those who bless you, and I promise to curse those who curse you. Through you I will bless all people."
Did you hear that, Discovery Team? God is making a promise to this Abram guy, and it's a big promise too. God is promising to turn Abram into the father of a great nation. That means that Abram will have so many children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren that they'll fill up an entire country and more. But there is a catch. God says that the promise will only be kept if Abram leaves his homeland and trusts God to lead the way to a new home. Do you think it would be easy for Abram to pack up and go? What if you were in Abram's sandals? What would you do?
Well, Abram left. He packed up all of his possessions, his servants, his sheep, his tents, everything he had, and he left, just as the Lord told him to do. He traveled west with his wife Sarai and his nephew Lot. in the direction of a land he had never been to before, all because of a promise from the Lord. And if that isn't amazing enough, Abram was already 75 years old when this happened. His wife Sarai was almost that old herself, but that did not stop them from traveling hundreds of miles across scorching deserts and high mountains in search of the land which the Lord had promised. When they arrived at the tree of Moreh, the Lord spoke once again to Abram. "Abram," the Lord said, "I promise to give this land to your descendants." So Abram built an altar to the Lord, who had brought him safely to that place.
Well, Abram did it. He trusted God enough to travel across the desert, and God brought him safely to a new home. That was part of the promise, but there's still more of the promise to be kept.
Now, Abram's nephew Lot, who had been traveling with him, had his own servants and sheep and tents, and there was just not enough food and water in that region to support them all. So Abram said to Lot, "There's plenty of land here for everyone. Let's split up, so there won't be any quarrels over space. If you choose to go to the left, I promise to go to the right. If you choose the land on the right, I'll go to the left." Lot looked out and saw that the land to the east was a green and fertile valley. So he took his possessions and moved to the city of Sodom by the Jordan River. Abram moved his tents to live in the land of Canaan, just as he had promised.
Abram makes and keeps promises of his own. We call a person like that righteous. A righteous person is someone you can trust, someone who keeps his or her promises. Abram was righteous, or kept his promise to Lot, by letting Lot choose first where he wanted to live.
And there the Lord appeared to Abram and said, "Look, Abram, look to the east and the west and the north and the south as far as you can. All of this land will belong to you and your children and your children's children. I'll make a promise to you that your descendants will be like the sand of the earth. It would be as hard to count all the sand on the earth as it would be to count your descendants. Go and walk the length and breadth of the land, for I am giving it all to you." Abram dwelled in that land, and by helping to defend the country from its enemies, he made peace with the people living there. His wealth and reputation also grew, and he was known as a man who always kept his promises.
He's righteous, man.
Several years later, the Lord appeared to Abram again. "Fear not, Abram," the Lord said, "for I am your shield and your great reward." But Abram asked, "What do you mean, great reward? How can you reward me if I still have no children? Isn't that what you promised? At this rate, I'll have to give my servants my inheritance." "That's not going to happen, Abram. I promise you that you will have a son of your own, and he will be your heir." And the Lord took Abram outside and said, "Look up into the sky and count the stars, if you can. I promise that's how many descendants you will have." And Abram knew that God was righteous and telling the truth.
Abram knows that God is the most righteous one of all. God has made a promise to give him a son, and since God is totally righteous, we should discover that this promise will be kept.
"I am the Lord who brought you to this land and promised that it would be yours." But Abram said, "Lord, there are other people and kings living here. How can you say I will own this land?" "I will make a covenant with you, Abram," the Lord said. "Bring me a heifer, a goat, and a ram, each 3 years old, along with a dove and a young pigeon." So Abram brought all the animals, cut them in two, and arranged the two halves opposite each other on the ground, making a pathway between the halves. Now, don't get your little heads in a tizzy, Discovery Team. I know that cutting up animals sounds pretty gross, but all this messy stuff is just the way people used to make covenants a long time ago. Kind of the same way that we sign a contract today. It makes sure that everything in the covenant is nice and legal. Abram fell into a deep sleep, and a thick darkness surrounded him. And the Lord said to Abram, "Your descendants will be strangers in a foreign country, and will be treated as slaves for 400 years. But I will bring them out of that place back to this country, and the land I have promised you will be theirs." And the Lord, in the form of a blazing torch, passed between the two halves of the animals to seal the covenant. Now that's what I call cutting a deal. But seriously, Discovery Team, did you pay close attention to the covenant that God is making? The Lord is guaranteeing that the land that Abraham is living in will belong to his descendants. But once again, there's two sides to the deal, so to speak. And before they can own the land, Abram's descendants must spend 400 years in slavery. That's a pretty steep price, but by letting the Lord walk between the halves of the animals, Abram has agreed to it. A dozen years passed, and still Sarai, Abram's wife, had not given birth to any children. Abram was 99 years old at this time, and Sarai was almost 90 herself. But again the Lord appeared to Abram. "Abram," the Lord said, "I have come to confirm the covenant which I am making with you." And Abram fell down on the ground before the Lord. "Once again, my covenant with you is to make you the father of many nations. So from now on, your name will be Abraham, which means father of many. My covenant will be an everlasting covenant with you and your descendants. I will be your God and the God of your children, and the land of Canaan will be given as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants. But covenants go two ways, Abraham. If I promise to be your God, then you must promise to be my people. If you agree to this covenant, then you and every other male relative 8 days old or more must be circumcised. This will be a sign that you are my people."
This is the big one, Discovery Team. The Lord isn't just promising land and children to Abraham. The Lord is now promising to be God forever and ever. And that means all kinds of good things. Protection, help, love, just to name a few. All Abraham has to do in return is promise to worship and trust God all the time and be known as God's people. I will be your God and you will be my people. A contract that sounds almost too good to be true.
"And as for your wife Sarai," the Lord continued, "her name is no longer Sarai, it will be Sarah. I will bless her, and she will give birth to a son. She will be the mother of nations, and her descendants will be kings." At that, Abraham rolled over with laughter. "How can a 100-year-old man have a son?" he chuckled to himself. "And Sarah's 90. How can she have a child?" But God heard Abraham laughing. "Yes, it's true," the Lord said. "Sarah will have a son, and you will name him Isaac. You will know that my covenant is real because of him." And then the Lord left Abraham alone.
Oh, that's a good one. You see, Discovery Team, God is making a joke. God heard Abraham laughing, so he told Abraham to name the baby Isaac. And Isaac means laughter. It's like having to name your kid Chuckles or Giggles.
Abraham was relaxing by the entrance of his tent. It was about 3 in the afternoon, and it was much too hot to do any work. From out of nowhere he saw 3 strangers approaching nearby. He knew right away that it was the Lord coming to visit. So he ran to meet them and bowed down before the men. Please stay here with me for a while, if you are happy with me, Lord. Sit under the shade of this tree and be out of the hot sun. Let me bring you water to wash your feet and food to refresh you." And the men decided to stay.
The 3 men that came to visit Abraham were actually the Lord and 2 angels. Abraham was so excited that he could hardly stand still. How would you react if God paid a surprise visit to your house tomorrow? Would your house be ready? More importantly, would you be ready?
So Abraham, despite how old he was and how hot it was outside, ran to the tent to his wife Sarah. "Quick," he said, "get some flour and bake bread for our guests." Then he hurried out to the herd and picked out a tender calf to be prepared for the meal. He rushed to get some curds and milk and prepared a meal for his guests. But he did not eat with them. He just stood under a tree nearby, watching and waiting. When they had finished eating, they asked Abraham, "Where is your wife Sarah?" "She's over there in the tent," Abraham replied. And the Lord said, "I will return to this place a year from now, and Sarah will have a son."
Once again, God is reminding Abraham of the promise to send him a son of his own. Abraham has already waited nearly 15 years for God to keep that promise, but he still has faith that God will keep the covenant. How long would you be able to wait for someone to keep a promise? Could you wait 15 years if you had to? Could you wait longer than that?
Sarah had been inside the tent listening to all the commotion outside. When she heard that she would have a son, she giggled and thought to herself, "How can I have a child? Both Abraham and I are much too old." Back outside, the Lord said to Abraham, "Why did Sarah just laugh and say, 'How can I have a child now that I'm old?' Doesn't she know that nothing is impossible for God? I promise that when I return next year, Sarah will have a son." But Sarah poked her head out of the tent. "I didn't laugh," she called out to the visitors. She lied because she was scared. How could he have known she was laughing? But this was no ordinary visitor. It was the Lord. God was keeping a promise. "Yes, Sarah," the Lord said, "you were laughing."
Now Sarah is laughing too. If God's promise really does come true, that baby is going to have the perfect name. Pay close attention, Discovery Team, and see if God keeps the promise to send a new baby.
The 3 visitors got up to leave. They headed out toward the direction of Sodom, and Abraham escorted them on their way. The Lord said to Abraham, "Abraham, you are an honest and just person, and I will surely keep every promise I've made to you, because you are so faithful to me. Because of that, I can't keep the secret about what I'm about to do. The cities of Sodom and Gomorrah are filled with nothing but sinful people, and I am going there to see if things are as bad as I have heard. If they are, then the cities must be destroyed." Abraham was quite concerned because he knew that his nephew Lot lived in the city of Sodom. "Lord," Abraham pleaded, "surely you won't destroy the good people in the cities along with the bad. What if you find 50 good people there? Would you destroy a city if it contained 50 righteous people?"
Abraham wants to protect his nephew Lot. Lot could be seriously hurt if Sodom is destroyed, but Abraham also trusts God's promises. He knows that if God promises not to destroy the city, God will keep His word and the city will be saved.
The Lord said, "If I find 50 righteous people in the city, I promise I will not destroy it." "What if there are just 45 good people there? Surely you would spare the city for 45 people." "Yes, for 45 I would spare it." Again Abraham asked, "What if only 40 are found?" "For 40 people I would spare it." "Please, Lord, don't be angry for my asking, but what if only 30 people can be found?" "I would not destroy it if I find 30 there." "And Lord, just one more time if I may," Abraham asked, What if only 10 are found there? I promise you, Abraham, for the sake of 10 righteous people, I will not destroy it. Then the Lord left Abraham, and Abraham returned home.
It almost sounds as if Abraham is trying to bargain with God in order to ensure Lot's safety. But God already knew that if 10 righteous people were found in Sodom, the city would not be destroyed. Have you ever tried to make a bargain with God? Have you ever tried to make a deal with God to get what you want? God already knows what's best for you, so there's no need to bargain or bicker. I think it's a better idea to talk with God about everything and trust that God will do what He thinks is best. What do you think?
When the 2 angels arrived in the city of Sodom, they could not find 10 righteous people. Only Lot and his family. The rest of the people were horrible and sinful. So they warned Lot, "Hurry, take your wife and daughters and get out of here, because the Lord is about to punish the city and destroy it." And the 2 men led Lot and his family safely out of the city, for the Lord was merciful to them. And the angels told them, "Run for your lives, don't look back, and don't stop anywhere, or you will be swept away with the rest of the city." By the time the sun had risen, the Lord rained down a burning fire over the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and every living thing was destroyed. But Lot's wife looked back toward the cities, and she was turned into a pillar of salt.
The angels told Lot and his family, "Don't look back," and they meant it. The angels knew what was best for Lot and his family. But Lot's wife must have really missed her home. Do you own anything that would be hard to give up? Would you give it up if God told you it was the right thing to do?
Early that morning, Abraham went back to the place where he had spoken with the Lord. He looked down toward the cities and saw nothing but a dense smoke rising from the land, like smoke from a furnace. So when God destroyed the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, He remembered the promise made to Abraham, and the life of Abraham's nephew Lot was saved.
When God spoke to Abraham, God made a promise. When Abraham's nephew was in danger, God made a promise. And when the city of Sodom was destroyed, God kept that promise. Lot was saved. And my friends, I'm here today to tell you that that's a pretty good sign that God will keep all His other promises as well.
Now it just so happened that the Lord also kept the other promise made to Abram. Sarah became pregnant and gave birth to a son at exactly the time that God said she would. Sarah smiled and said, "God made me laugh in my old age, and everyone who hears about me will laugh too. Who would have thought that I would have Abraham's children this late in life? And yet it happened just as God said." Abraham named the boy Isaac, and when the child was 8 days old, Abraham circumcised him as God had commanded him to do. Abraham was 100 years old when Isaac was born.
I knew it, I knew it. God has kept His promise. Others may say God is righteous, or God protects from harm and danger, or better yet, God is loving and caring to those who follow Him. Well, these are all true, but I'm here to tell you one other thing about God. When God makes a promise, God keeps a promise.
A few years passed. Isaac grew into a strong young boy, and Abraham loved him very much. One day, however, the Lord appeared to Abraham again with a terrible message. "Abraham," the Lord said. "Here I am," he replied. "Take your son, your only son Isaac, and go to the mountain region of Moriah. Sacrifice him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains I will show you." And with that, the Lord vanished.
Wait a minute, that can't be right. God wouldn't tell Abraham to sacrifice Isaac, not after the promise, not after the long wait, not after everything was going so well. How could Abraham be the father of a nation if he gave up his promised son Isaac? That wasn't part of the deal. Surely Abraham won't agree to something awful like this.
But Abraham did not even argue. Early the next morning he got up and saddled his donkey. He took 2 servants and his son Isaac and set out to the region of Moriah. On the 3rd day of the trip, he looked out and saw the mountain in the distance. He said to his servants, "Stay here with the donkey while the boy and I go up there. We're going to worship, and then we will come back here when we're done." Only Abraham knew what the Lord had ordered him to do. Isaac himself carried the wood for the burnt offering, and Abraham carried the knife and the torch as they headed off alone. "Father," Isaac asked, "we have the wood and the fire, but where is the lamb for the burnt offering?" Abraham answered slowly but surely, "God will provide the lamb for the burnt offering, my son." And the 2 of them went on together. When at last they reached the place God had instructed, Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood on it. Abraham sadly but obediently bound up his son Isaac and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then he reached out his hand and took the knife to slay his son.
Making a deal with a cut-up animal is gruesome enough, but sacrificing Isaac, that's just going too far. I can't watch. Tell me when it's over.
At the very last moment, an angel of the Lord called out, "Abraham! Abraham!" "Here I am," he shouted. "Do not kill the boy," the angel said. "Do not do anything to harm him at all. Now I know that you will obey and respect the Lord. You would even give up your only beloved son."
What happened? What happened?
Just then, Abraham looked behind him and saw a ram caught by its horns in the thicket bushes. He went over and took the ram and offered it as a sacrifice to the Lord in place of his son Isaac. And the angel called Abraham from heaven again and said, "The Lord of heaven says, I swear that because you are willing to give up your only son, I will keep my covenant and all my promises to you."
Oh, thank goodness. It was just a test. God was testing Abraham to make sure that Abraham would keep his end of the bargain and trust God at all times. Remember, I will be your God and you will be my people? I guess being God's people isn't always the easiest thing to do. It means you have to trust that God knows what's best. Whew.
The Lord says, "I guarantee that you will be blessed, and I will make your descendants as numerous as the stars in the sky and the sands on the seashore. Your descendants will take possession of the land I have promised you, and through your offspring all nations on the earth will be blessed, because you, Abraham, have obeyed me." Then Abraham, along with Isaac, went down the mountain and returned to their servants with the wonderful story